A ban on building minarets in Switzerland stuns Europe and the Muslim world, stoking an already emotional debate. But does the vote reflect a rising trend against Islam across the continent? Or does the referendum simply reflect a rare departure from Swiss neutrality? And is the vote legal in the first place? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. A ban on building minarets in Switzerland has been condemned internationally. Before the referendum, polls had shown the proposed ban being defeated. But on Sunday, 57% of the Swiss population voted in favour of blocking any new minarets being built attached to mosques. Well, the furor began back in 2005 over an application to build a minaret on an Islamic community centre in the east of the country. The debate went all the way to the Federal Supreme Court, which allowed the minaret to be built. In Islamic countries, minarets are the towers used to broadcast the call to prayer for Muslims, of course. But in Switzerland, as in many European countries, they are mostly decorative additions. Now, the Swiss People's Party argue that minarets are a symbol of the potential Islamification of Switzerland. Muslims make up around 5% of the population in Switzerland, and the Justice Ministry say the vote may actually go against Switzerland's constitution, so may be illegal. Many are now afraid the ban may have serious consequences.
The initiators have achieved something everyone wanted to prevent, and that is to influence and change the relations to Muslims and their social integration in a negative way. We are frightened, and if the atmosphere continues to be like this, and if the anti-Islamic hate increases, then the Muslims indeed will not feel safe anymore. This, of course, is very unpleasant.
Well, it's a controversial business, and joining us to discuss it are our guests. In Bern, Farhad Ashfar. He's president of the Coordination of Islamic Organisations in Switzerland. In Brussels, we have Ian Trainer. He's Europe editor of the British newspaper The Guardian. But let's start back in Bern with Oscar Freisinger. He's a member of Parliament from the People's Party and is a supporter of the ban. Mr. Freisinger, first of all, would you lay out precisely why this ban is a good thing?
Will be now capable to avoid minarets being built where the people are against it, like in this little country side town in Wangen, where 3,800 people signed a petition against the building of a minaret out of 4,500 people, and the city council was against, and there were 70 oppositions, and the tribunal decided this minaret has to be built, and who paid for this minaret? Who is behind this minaret? The Grey Wolves, and that's an extremist group of Turkey, and we wouldn't accept that any longer in Switzerland.
But why? Why precisely is the ban a good thing in your view? Why don't you want minarets?
Because if you can't avoid like in this example, this was the example which was the beginning of all that. If there wouldn't have been that problem, we wouldn't have made this initiative. As soon as we saw that it is impossible on a lower level to avoid bans on minarets, so we had to try to do something on the constitutional level. Because in Switzerland we have to direct democracy. The sovereign here is the people. It's very different
I understand that, Mr. Freisinger. Absolutely, I understand that. But
yes.
You know, what's the problem with minarets? They're not unattractive architectural features, are they? Or what's the problem? Do they contain rockets or something?
Yes, I see what you mean. The problem is who pays for them. It's most of the time the Wahhabits, Salafists, or like the Grey Wolves or something like that. Groups which are not really don't really accept the society, the state of right, which have some problems with the democracy, and that's the problem. The moderate Muslims don't need this minaret. They have their places to pray. We have nothing against them. They are welcome here in Switzerland. They can even tomorrow or in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years do their prayer, believe to Allah and whatever they want. It's not a religious problem. We have only a problem with the political or legal part of Islam, where it is in confrontation with our liberal society and our democracy. That's the problem, the only one. It's not a theological problem. It's not Christianity against Islam, or it's not the hate for Muslims. It had nothing to do with that. It's only a legal problem, because there are some parts of the Sharia or the Quran which are really difficult to adapt
let's put your points
to the Swiss legal system.
Ashfar. Dr. Ashfar, the problem is, whichever way you slice this up, the majority of people in Switzerland have voted in favour of this ban, and democracy has spoken.
Bismillah. After 40 years of peaceful living in Switzerland, of course the Islamic community is disappointed, because there was no reason to treat a religious minority in that way, to exclude them from their own decision-taking. But let me at first express my gratitude to the Swiss government, to the political parties, to our sister religions, who all supported us in this quarrel with the right-wing movement, which has misinformed the population by false information. And the result is they have voted in a way which oppress the Islamic community.
But Dr. Ashfar, you're not crediting the population with a great deal of intelligence, are you? I appreciate the fact that the government didn't support the ban, and various religious leaders around the country didn't support the ban. But nevertheless, the people have spoken. They don't want minarets.
It's right. It's a democratic vote. It's a legitimate vote in a certain sense, because it's in the framework of the Constitution, but in the same sense it's in confrontation with central values of the Swiss Constitution, like freedom of religion, like forbidding discrimination, like protection of the minority by the majority, and therefore in a moralic way, it's legal, but it's in a moralic way an illegitimate vote, and I'm convinced that the international community, like Human Rights Court or the United Nations or European Council, will overrule it.
Okay, Ian Traynor, you're a Europe editor of the Guardian newspaper, a British newspaper. You've got your finger on the pulse around Europe. Were you surprised that the majority in Switzerland supported the ban?
Yes, I was very surprised. I mean, nobody would have predicted this rather overwhelming vote on Sunday. It throws up all sorts of interesting. I mean, I think the development here is more nuanced than perhaps just Christian Swiss versus immigrant or Muslim pieces of architecture. I mean, there are many, many elements to this, and there are many things that you can say about it. In the first instance, one has to ask the question about the opinion polling, for example. The reason that this came as such a surprise on Sunday is that all of the opinion polls in Switzerland, where one expects standards to be high, professional, well-endowed, well-equipped, etc., were showing quite a sizable minority were going to vote yes, and that was a bit worrying for integrationists. But nonetheless, they would have lost. In fact, the opinion polls were 20% out. So that raises a couple of issues. In the first instance, how did they get it so wrong? Secondly, were people kind of ashamed of how they were actually going to vote? Were they lying to the pollsters about their true intentions? Were they secretly feeling a little bit guilty? I don't know the answer to these questions, but I think for the Swiss and certainly for the opinion, the people carrying out the surveys, it's been an absolute fiasco. That's the first thing. So it really was surprising, because we journalists, of course, were reading the polls and looking at the analysis in advance. And then if you look at the campaign itself leading up to the vote on Sunday, and at this point, I mean, one really would need to take issue with Mr. Frasinger, with respect, is saying about the sourcing and the money that's flooding into Switzerland to build these minarets, and the Wahhabi money, and where is it all coming from, and that's the reason that this has got to be stopped. I really think we have to get this in a little bit of perspective. How many minarets are we talking about here? In fact, the oldest one, as I understand, is in Zurich. Zurich. It's from the 1960s. It's part of the urbanscape of Zurich. It never causes a problem. There's another one in Geneva. And in fact, the one that Mr. Frasinger referred to in Wangen, put up by the local Turkish cultural club, is very modest.
Okay, well, let's put those points.
Is that the extent of all this Wahhabi money that's flooding into Switzerland to build mosques? I don't know.
Okay, well, let's put that point to Mr. Frasinger. You're overstating the case, sir.
No, we only want to stop an evolution which could take hostage the moderate Muslims, which are very welcome to us. I don't want somebody who believes in Allah or in Muhammad to change his belief. For me, a religion is worth being lived, being practiced, even in Switzerland. No problem with that. I've never attacked this during all the campaign. I've never made like
this
caricatures.
It's hard to believe that that's true, Mr. Frasinger. And let me just point you to the publicity posters as part of the campaign pushing for the ban. The minarets within the posters are displayed as rockets. I mean, it doesn't seem like you're saying that this is a political cause. You're saying it's a violent cause, and you're inciting hatred, aren't you?
Moment. They are not rockets. I've never seen a rocket which has this form. It couldn't fly like that. I know a lot of minarets who have this form. And the other part of this poster was this woman in this veil and quasi burqa or something like that. Because one of the main problems we have with the integration of Islam in our liberal societies is the place of women and the rights of women. The equality here is great between women and men. And the problem is, I know some cases in my canton, home canton, where Islamic women are 15 years in Switzerland and don't even speak one word French because they're taken on this outside. They're quite in a ghetto, maintained in a ghetto. They have no real rights like we give here to the women. And these are the real problems. It's the way Islam is practiced on the legal level, on the public level, not the personal belief, the mosque, the ritual and so on. That's not a problem for us.
Okay, Dr. Ashford, let me bring you in at this point. A country, as we talked of a little earlier, 400,000 Muslims, and a country with only 4 minarets to date. Why do you think that the general views did not prevail against this ban?
It's very simple. Because the situation of the Muslim community in Switzerland is not in that way Mr. Frasinger states. We don't have the freedom to practice our religion as we understand it. I give you an example. After 40 years of living in Switzerland, 2 days ago some man has died. And he has brought up his children here. He was married here. He couldn't be buried in an Islamic graveyard because the community didn't accept it. The neighbor community, Zurich, has a graveyard, but they didn't accept it because he was of another community. So the family had to fly him out and back to Turkey. And that's simply inhuman. We have a lot of such problems. The Islamic community has, if they like to practice their religion, they have to live in cellars. Our mosques, we don't have mosques. We have only one mosque in Geneva. The other praying room are in parkings, in fabric areas, in outlets. And that's the reality of the Islamic community. We can't even have the possibility to form our imams for our community.
Okay, well,
that's the reality.
Okay, despite the majority vote for the ban, there were also plenty of voices on the streets of Zurich who were against it. Take a listen to this.
It is very bad for the image of Switzerland. It is embarrassing.
There should be freedom of opinion for everyone. Why shouldn't they have their minarets? Anyway, they won't be paving the whole country with them, will they?
Forced marriages and other things like cemeteries separating the pure and impure, we don't have that in Switzerland, and we do not want to introduce it. Therefore, there's no room for minarets in Switzerland.
I'm shocked by this initiative. By this answer, I've given you my position. I'm against this initiative because I think it's intolerance.
In the end, of course, the ban was passed. It just goes to show, Mr. Trainer, that Islam's PR machine kind of isn't working, is it?
It's not working, and also not only the Islam's PR machine, but the entire Swiss establishment machine, the government, the parliament, the majority of MPs, the churches, the Vatican, the NGOs, the human rights organisations. In other words, this vote on Sunday was quite an act of defiance by the public, it has to be said, against the great and the good of Switzerland, the television, the main newspapers, and so on and so forth. But I do have just a couple, again, I'm afraid, just a couple of questions really for Mr. Frasinger, because he's making some quite strong allegations. For example, I would like to know when the women's vote was introduced in Switzerland, for example, since it turns out that the Swiss People's Party is such a great defender of women's rights. And also, he was making these allegations at the beginning of the programme about all this Saudi Arabian Wahhabi money flooding into Switzerland to build minarets. And as we know, there are two. Apart from the two in the cities, which are rather old, there are another 2 minarets in Switzerland. So, I just don't understand this. It sounds like nonsense to me.
Mr. Frank saying what you've been saying is absolute nonsense.
Is this man from Great Britain I'm listening to?
Yeah,
He's
the European editor of The Guardian newspaper, a well-established newspaper in the United Kingdom.
He should know it better, because in Great Britain the situation is very out of control. They have 7,000 Sharia legal decisions every year. They have big ghettos, they have communitarism. They are not capable of avoiding a parallelism of societies. And he comes and makes me a lesson. I'm from Great Britain. What's this? I'm very astonished about it. We had a long time now, hundreds of years, to change our society since the Enlightenment, to separate the church from the state. It was a long evolution we had to make. We had made our mistakes, a lot of them, Crusades and so on, and the Inquisition. That all was wrong. That was a betrayal of the gospel. That was wrong. But now we have evolved to a new society.
You've had your say. Let's Ian Trainer have his now.
Sorry, could I finish? Could I finish? I can't let
Ian Trainer, please go ahead.
Well,
I can't let in now a practice which is contrary to all that. Because there are a lot of forced marriages here.
We're not talking about Great Britain here, are we? That's a separate problem. There are separate problems here. We're not talking about Great Britain. I'm not an apologist for the failures or the successes of multiculturalism and integration in my country. I don't live in Great Britain in any case. We are talking about the recent events in Switzerland. There are some factual issues here that would illuminate things, and in fact Mr. Frasinger is avoiding the issues altogether. Simple fact, when did Swiss women get the vote? Since it turns out that the Swiss People's Party is a great protector of female rights.
Look, I'll tell you what, we don't want to go into all that, obviously, but we take your point. Now, as we've said, the referendum result has been widely criticised by political and religious leaders. The French Foreign Minister, Bernard Kouchner, said he was shocked and also said, I hope the Swiss come back on this decision. You have to ask who is the target, and if the target is the sort of moderate Muslims that we always say that we want, then it really is an error. The Vatican weighed in with one archbishop saying, I don't see how one can ban the religious freedom of a minority or to stop a group of people from having their own church. Support did come from a controversial politician in Holland, and he said, I really would hope that other countries would follow. I will take myself an initiative in the Dutch Parliament to also come up with a resolution to try and get such a referendum against more minarets in the Netherlands. In Trainer, fear is already well in place with anti-Islam feelings spreading in certain parts of Europe. Do you think it's a widening trend?
Yes, it is indeed. Of course, it's a widening trend. It is a big problem. Let's not try and ignore that. I mean, the far-right, extreme-right parties across certainly Western Europe, where there are large immigrant and Muslim populations. What we're talking about, 18 million, roughly 18 million Muslims mainly in Western Europe living now, and the problems of integration and multiculturalism. Now, of course, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, who is now the second strongest party in Holland, with his notorious Fitna film, where he likens the Quran to Mein Kampf and the Nazis, is it will run with this. The heirs to Jörg Haider next door in Austria, similarly, where in the two provinces of, for example, of Carinthia and Vorarlberg, there are de facto bans on mosque and minaret building, although they're mainly using the licensing procedures to effect that. The National Front in France, of course, they're applauding the Swiss vote, and there are problems in other countries as well. Italy, the Northern League, which, yeah.
Forgive me for jumping in, but let's put this to Fahad Ashfar. So what can be done to quell this growing trend in your view?
Well, the reality is, if you compare the Swiss situation with other different countries, you will see it's a very peaceful community living here and trying only to practice their religion. The anti-Islamic movement in the world has a lot to do with geopolitical strategic movements and reflection. After the breakdown of the Soviet Union, a new enemy was created. You just have to think how many literature has been published on the issue. I just remember Huntington and so on. The issue of Islam should be on the framework of the Swiss constitution be discussed. We can't import fear from everywhere from the world to Switzerland and make the Muslim community responsible, as we can't have the Catholic majority responsible here, or the Protestant community responsible for what is happening somewhere in the world. We should check the reality and see what we can do to live together in peace. And we are facing a lot of juridical problems now.
Okay, Mr. Freisinger, that's not a bad value to aim for, is it?
Oh yes, we want this equilibrium between the different religions to be maintained, and it has been maintained until we have this legal problem with some parts of Islam. They are welcome in our cemeteries. Why can't they be buried with us? Because we are infidels, and they don't want to be buried with infidels. So if they don't want this, they must go back to their home country to be buried. I can't. I would be. I would agree to be buried again aside a Muslim. For me, it wouldn't be a problem. You see what, we are very liberal in that case.
We're
but
running
we
out of time now. I just want to bring in Ian Trainer just towards the end of the programme. The reality is, isn't it, that this ban will be overturned, won't it, either in the Supreme Court or in the European Court of Human Rights?
Well, of course, the paradox here is that, of course, Switzerland is one of the most democratic countries in the world, using this system of direct democracy and plebiscitary democracy to determine what the law is. And in this case, basically, they've used, a measure of extreme democracy to arrive at what might be seen as an anti-democratic outcome, which will be overturned by the courts, will be very difficult to convert into law, will be against the Constitution, against the European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Charter, and there's no future for it. So it's a bit paradoxical.
Well, we'll be following this story closely on Al Jazeera. Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed all for your time. Oscar Freisinger, Fahad Ashfar and Ian Trainer. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Drop us an email, of course, insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark. It's goodbye.